little girl. Welcome to Esoterica and Nonsense, a podcast where we discuss myths, legends, folktales, fairy tales, supernatural phenomenon, and religions from around the world. I am your host, Annabelle, aka, this is just story time. We're basically here to just have story time. You know the drill. If you're new to my podcast, welcome. If you're an OG, you're the best. And yeah, I'm just really excited. I'm going to burn some Palo Santo right now because I've just been finding it's been very grounding, especially when I start to overthink. I'm starting to record myself on video for my podcast because I have discovered that that's what the algorithm wants now. I'm trying to feed this flippin' algorithm, people. And I learned today that the first 2 episodes that I recorded on video just didn't save to my camera. Fantastic. It's like 3 hours worth of me talking to myself. Don't worry, the audio is up, but I feel a little bit defeated. I feel kind of nervous because, I don't know, I'm not really technology literate, and it's taken me a few years to feel comfortable recording myself. And now adding the video component, I feel like kind of shy. I feel like, I don't know, I feel like I'm like at a middle school dance again. Also, is it just me? But I feel like middle school affected me more than I realized. And now that I'm 30, I've just been thinking back to all these mean girls at my middle school and how much their opinion of me in middle school, I feel like it's still a voice in my head or something. And yeah, I feel like when I make my podcast, I'm thinking about all these assholes from my middle school, finding me and hating on me or something. And I've just kind of been unpacking that. I feel like that's really sad. And yeah, anyway, hello, welcome to 2025. I'm loving 2025. I don't know about you. And today I've chosen an incredible topic. Today we are going to talk about Manichaeism. I don't know if you can hear these peppers barking in the background, but I literally waited 10 minutes to start recording, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to let them bark. I'm going to let them get it out. And then I start recording, and they're just back on the bullshit. They're just back on it. The peppers love being on the podcast. We're going to have to get a live interview. I don't really know their names, but I have seen their bodies through the window, and they are medium, short-legged, round boys. One of them is kind of like a hot dog dog. He has the complexion of a hot dog. And then the other one is white with brown spots, but they're very round, almost square in their proportions. A little bit longer than they are round, but they're very round. They have short legs, but they are medium boys. That's why I called them a short leg, medium, round boy. And they just barked, so I'm going to take that as agreement. Manichaeism. What is it, you ask? I'm so glad that you asked. Manichaeism is a religion that I had actually never really heard of until I started doing Wikipedia deep dives in the middle of the night, which is why I started this podcast. And Manichaeism is a religion that in many ways has been forgotten, but has quite a large legacy on the world and specifically on Christianity. Now, if you have not listened to the episode about Zoroastrianism, I highly recommend that you do. In a big way, Manichaeism is almost like Zoroastrianism part 2, part 2. It's similar in a sense to what Christianity is to Judaism, because in many ways Christianity is an add-on to Judaism, but in another way they rebranded the whole religion and has distanced themselves from the culture of Judaism and a lot of the original holidays. And so Manichaeism is same but different, if that makes sense. Let's get into it. Enough of me pontificating. Also, I like to remind everyone, I've said it once and I'll say it again. I grew up in the United States of America, And I have essentially like a peasant education. So I'm researching this on the internet. I've also done a bunch of like my esoteric research like on my own and books and whatnot, but I always just want us to look at the historical lens of any kind with a critical mind, right? Because who's the one writing these histories down? Like usually men who have been colonized in some way. And often the history we read is read by colonizers, right? So I don't know. You already know the drill. I go on this rant. It seems like every week. But I just wanted to throw that out there as a reminder. Okay, so what is Manichaeism? Manichaeism was a religion that was actually started by a man named Manny. And Manny was born around the year 216 CE, or as us older folks were taught, AD, right? But I think CE now means current era. So anyway, he was born around 216 and died in around 274. So this was before Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire. This is like an interesting time in the ancient world because from our perspective, we consider this ancient, but this was the time when the Egyptian Empire was now being colonized mostly by the Arab world and then in some points by the Roman Empire. There was a lot of globalization happening. And as a reminder, this is a good few thousand years after Zoroastrianism was created, right? So, Manny, who's sometimes known as Manes or Manichaeus, was the founder of Manichaeism. And Manichaeism is a dualistic religion that grew quite popular in the ancient world and is considered an add-on or an expansion of Zoroastrianism. Mani was a Persian prophet and a spiritual teacher who sought to synthesize elements of various religious traditions into a universal belief system. And this is the thing about Manny that is very visionary that I want to point out, and we're going to get into details, but not necessarily from a religious perspective, but from a PR perspective, like a public relations perspective, Manny created a blueprint which was replicated time and time again, specifically by the Christian megalith, really like the Roman Church. The Roman Catholic Church really took a lot of his ideas on how to spread a religion. And so he's almost like one of the greatest business minds of religion, and you'll see why. Okay, so like I mentioned, Manny was born around 216. He was born in Babylonia, which at the time was part of the Sasanian Empire, which is from our perspective, like ancient Persia, and is now the modern day Iraq. And this is, again, a really interesting overlap because it's not necessarily super far from where Zoroaster was believed to be born. And, just throwing that out there. So, Manny came from a family that was a Jewish Christian sect. And they were known as, I looked up how to pronounce this and I already forgot. No. Elkosites. I'm pretty sure it's Elkosites. I've looked up other pronunciations that seemed very wrong, so we're going to go with Elkosites. And I feel like I've seen this word written down, but I actually knew nothing about it. And I found this really interesting because I feel like I just touched on this, but I always kind of wondered why Christianity left behind so much of the Jewish culture. Like Christians don't celebrate Passover, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Purim, like all of these like holidays and thousands of years worth of culture feels like it was erased, even though they still like read the Old Testament, which is the Torah, may I add. Anyway, so this religious group known as the Elkosites were an ancient Jewish-Christian combo, and their population was mostly located in Lower Mesopotamia in the province of the Azoristan, which was basically a part of the Sassanid Empire. This would again be in the areas of modern-day Iran and Iraq. And this group had most of its popularity between the years 100 and 400 CE. And a big part, this is like a brief summary, but an interesting part of their beliefs revolved around frequent baptisms for purification and a lot of Gnostic orientation and ideas. And Gnosticism is something that I find also very interesting, which I actually need to do a full episode on. But this is just like a brief, super brief summary of Gnosticism, and stay tuned. I promise you I am going to do a full episode. But Gnosticism is a term used to describe a diverse set of religious and philosophical movements that emerged in the 1st and 2nd centuries CE, primarily in the Greco-Roman world. These traditions are united by their emphasis on gnosis, a form of esoteric experiential knowledge that leads to the spiritual enlightenment and salvation. Gnosticism heavily influenced early Christianity and Judaism, as well as other philosophical traditions, although it was later condemned as heretical by the Orthodox Christian authorities, of course. But Gnosticism is a really interesting branch of ancient religion, and it's still practiced to this day. It really focuses more on the theology aspect of religion, and so it's very heavy on reading ancient religious texts and really studying them almost academically, and working on things like translating them. What do they really mean? What are the contexts of these? What are the interpretations? In a sense, what's happening? No, dude, sometimes my recording equipment tries to connect to my cell phone, and it's like, why would I be wanting to connect to my cell phone while I'm recording through my microphone? Hello? I feel like I'm taking crazy pills. What was I talking about? Gnosticism. Interestingly, so like when I was in high school, I was doing like late night deep dives, and I stopped studying my schoolwork, and I started like buying books at bookstores and like going on crazy online tangents. But I ended up watching a really interesting documentary about theology, and how theology is like the grandchild of Gnosticism, and how that is what created the quote-unquote Illuminati. And according to this documentary, the Illuminati really, all it really was a group of Americans who we consider the founding fathers, who wanted to secede from Britain, and primarily because they wanted religious freedom. And essentially, according to this documentary, the founding fathers and a lot of other Americans, including George Washington and whatever, were meeting in secret to have theology meetings and to essentially like read ancient scriptures and unpack them academically, which I do find an interesting subject. I don't necessarily trust that these white men had any interesting hot takes, but I do really respect the practice. I am very interested in the idea of Gnosticism and the idea of academically understanding ancient texts, from many perspectives. Shout out Carl Jung. Carl Jung, I feel like, was Gnostic, maybe knowingly or unknowingly. I have no idea. Okay, so Manny, who is the prophet of Manichaeism, had a very interesting life, and this does kind of remind me of Zoroaster. Okay, wait 1 second. I need to adjust my chair. I hope that it doesn't make a loud noise. Please, please, please. Oh yeah, there we go. We need the full butt cheeks on the chair. We don't like the half butt cheek situation. So, at the age of 12, Manny allegedly reported an incident where he received his first divine revelation from a spiritual being, which he called the twin, or sometimes he would call it his heavenly self. And essentially, it was a figure that guided him throughout his life. So this was at the age of 12. Fast forward to the age of 24, he received another revelation instructing him to leave his family's religious sect and to preach a new universal religion. This is where the PR really comes in. So, like, in a nutshell, Mani's teachings aim to reconcile and transcend existing religions. So he combined elements of Zoroastrianism, Christianity, Buddhism, and Gnosticism. Very interesting. The key doctrines of his religion include 1, dualism. Essentially, a central aspect to this religion was the struggle between light and darkness, which does remind me a lot of Zoroastrianism and, of course, Christianity. According to Manny, the world is a battleground for the two opposing forces of light and dark, or good and evil, and that the human soul, which is a fragment of light, is trapped in the material body, which is made of darkness. Interesting. Another key principle of Manichaeism was salvation. Salvation involved a person liberating his or her soul from the material world through knowledge or gnosis, aesthetic practices, and ethical living. Manny viewed himself as the final prophet in a line that included Zoroaster, Buddha, and Jesus. For me, that's always a red flag. Like, I don't know how I feel about prophets necessarily, but when someone proclaims himself a prophet, I feel like it's a red flag. And I think if somebody proclaims themselves the last prophet, I feel like that's a huge red flag, right? Like, that's when I start getting skeptical of you. Because you're gonna like name drop yourself as Zoroaster, Buddha, and Jesus and say you're the last one. So like forever there's never gonna be another prophet in your legacy. I feel like that's a crock of shit, right? I feel like I'm right. Okay, another core principle that Manny believed was the idea of universal religious practice. He sought to create a universal belief system that could unite diverse traditions. The pieces of Zoroastrianism he liked was obviously the dualistic cosmology and also the idea of ethical dualism. The idea that like your ethics and your actions could play into this good or evil, this light or this dark. From Christianity, he pulled from the elements of Jesus's teachings, though he rejected the idea of Jesus's physical incarnation. Interesting. And from Buddhism, he pulled the ideas of aestheticism and reincarnation. And I do actually think that he is onto something here. What I'm not sure about, though, like just reading a lot of this information, is that I'm not necessarily mad at the things he's pulling from, but I'm almost wondering if he did this to be famous. You know how like some kids are like, I want to be famous, and at this time obviously there wasn't like movie stars. So like what if this was actually like a young person's plot to become a prophet for fame reasons, you know? And like maybe like I'm just like talking out of my ass right now. But the fact that he proclaimed himself a prophet and proclaimed himself the last prophet in this line, and he's like picking and choosing from all these religions, like what if this guy was actually just a public relations visionary and this was his plan to fame? That would be iconic. Let's make a movie about that, Hollywood. Put that in your pipe and smoke it. Hey, little Pepper. This is Annabelle here, reporting live from Pepper World HQ. If you enjoy the podcast, it would help so much if you could follow me. You could write a comment, give me 5 stars perhaps. Also, I would love to hear from you. Email in at esotericaandnonsense@gmail.com. I'd love to hear about your stories. I'd love to hear about suggestions. I would love to hear about any kind of weird, freaky thing that comes to your mind. Also, if you would like to support my podcast, you can follow me on Patreon. It's Patreon.com/esoterica and nonsense. I will also have a YouTube page coming at you so soon. And I also sell merch. You can look up my merch. It's in the show notes for every single episode, as well as the show notes for my show. I appreciate you so much. I made this podcast to connect with cool, freaky people like you. So thank you so much. Dude, these peppers are just barking up a flippin' storm. This is their world. It's not mine. It is their world. Okay, I'm just here zoning out. Okay, so one aspect, and okay, this is actually playing into my theory. One aspect about Manny that really kind of goes into this idea of him being a public relations genius was his method of missionary work. So he was all about preaching. Manny would travel widely throughout the ancient world, and he would preach about his religion in ancient Persia, Mesopotamia, and beyond. His teachings gained followers in the Sasanian Empire along the Silk Road, reaching as far as India, Central Asia, and the Roman Empire. And think about that, like, that's fucking visionary. He was going along the Silk Road and preaching. What? That's iconic. Another interesting aspect that Manny did, which again was brilliant from a marketing perspective, is that he would hire local artists in different places to do renderings of himself as a prophet. So for example, like in India, he would have an Indian artist draw him. And in Mesopotamia, he'd have a Mesopotamian artist. So along with his preachings, people would get art that was localized to them. Does this ring a bell? Because this is classic Christian methods of missionary work. The Christian world is known for doing this. All around the world, wherever they spread, they have local artists do renditions of the Mother Mary and Jesus. Like, it feels like it's copy and pasted from Manny's vision. Manny was also considered to be a prolific writer. He was composing works in multiple languages, including Syriac and Middle Persian. His key texts included the Shaburagan, which was written for King Shapur I, and this summarized his teachings. It had a living gospel, which was a sacred text for Manichaeans, as well as a book known as the Treasure of Life, which had the Book of Giants and many others. And that is crazy to me because I have heard of the Book of Giants, which I believe was a part of the Book of Enoch. And I didn't realize that this was considered to be part of Manichaeism. And if you don't know, the Book of Enoch, which includes many books, and also the Book of Giants, were found in versions of the Dead Sea Scrolls, not versions, they were found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, as well as some other ancient religious Christian texts that were found in the Middle East. And I always wondered why they weren't included. And obviously, now it makes more sense to me that the Roman Catholic Church was not having Manny. But I do find this to be very, very interesting. And I'm going to get into the Book of Giants in just 1 second. So, of course, as we expect, Manny was a very controversial character. People were not liking him. A lot of people who weren't converting to Manichaeism despised him. Now, I wasn't there. I can't necessarily make a personal judgment, but just like for me reading the facts, there is a part of me that thinks that Manny was more business oriented than he was spiritually oriented, simply based on how much he was trying to spread the religion. Like this almost feels like like a business, But again, like maybe his methods were just co-opted by people like the Roman Catholic Church who used it more as like a colonization tactic. Maybe Manny like really did this out of the goodness of his heart. Like who am I to say? I'm not trying to destroy his character right now. But from the facts that I'm reading alone, I'm just smelling like a little whiff of like, I want to be famous. I'm an entrepreneur. Like that's the kind of guy that Manny's giving me. I hate to say it. So, without surprise, a lot of people were really skeptical of him and didn't like him. And interestingly, specifically the Zoroastrians really didn't like him, which is understandable because I'll remind you from the Zoroastrianism episode, a big aspect of the religious teachings of Zoroastrianism were really about simplicity, right? Having kind intentions and doing kindness for the sake of kindness. So I could see why Zoroastrians may have an issue with Manny, thinking him maybe to be a little ego-driven and so focused on converting followers and like focusing less on charity and just being kind, which are kind of like the cornerstones of Zoroastrianism. So interestingly, while Manny was tolerated under King Shapur I in now modern-day Iraq, Manny's teachings were seen as a threat to the Zoroastrian priesthood. So eventually, under King Bahram I, Manny was arrested and imprisoned. Eventually, Manny died in the year 274, and if he was born in around 216, that makes him around 60 years old. And so he died after enduring torture and imprisonment. There are accounts that he may have been executed, and some traditions believe that he was flayed alive. Fuck. Even though he died at the age of 60, he left quite a legacy. And after he died, his religion spread widely. I mean, not a surprise. I feel like once the prophet dies, that's when it really gains momentum. He did become one of the most influential religions of late antiquity, which is crazy, right? Like no one ever talks about this stuff. And again, maybe I'm just a conspiracy theorist, but I feel like the Roman Catholic Church purposely wants to erase these religions, right? Like, why aren't we learning about this in school? I want to learn about this. So, after he died, Manichaean communities flourished in the Roman Empire and in Central Asia and China. A fun fact is, in Christianity, a nun's habit, how nuns have those they're called habits for some reason, but they're like those flowing fabrics on their head. That is directly derivative of Manichaean priest attire. Specifically the ones I'm thinking about the ones from The Sound of Music where in the front there's kind of a square, there's a square thing over the forehead, so it kind of drapes in a square situation. That is full on Manichaean dress. And it became co-opted by Christian churches, but that comes from Manichaean culture from the ancient world. And that's what's so interesting to me about this. The Roman Catholic Church hasn't even existed by the time he died. Rome was spreading its borders fast, but didn't have an official like religion. They were just kind of doing what is now called pagan stuff, but like the ancient Roman religion. And so there were practicing Manichaeans, people who were in priesthoods, people who were like converting and practicing. Like, what? I never knew. Eventually, the practice of Manichaeism declined, mostly due to persecution by Zoroastrians and Christians, and eventually Muslim populations. And over time, this just led to a decline in Manichaeism, similar to how Zoroastrianism declined. Eventually, by the 14th century, Manichaeism had largely disappeared as an organized religion. And that's actually not bad though, because he was born in the year 200, so that's almost a little over 1,000 years. That's not a bad run. That's not a bad run. I feel like he succeeded. If his dream was to be famous, 1,000 years of fame is not bad at all. So, even to this day, Manny did really make an influence, and specifically, Manny's ideas influenced the Gnostic traditions of Christianity, and they may have indirectly shaped early Christian and Islamic ideas. His cosmological myths and dualistic worldview resonate with certain philosophical and religious systems to this day. Specifically, the Book of Giants. What? So allegedly, Manny wrote the Book of Giants, which I just really want to emphasize is a huge deal. Like, I had no idea. A lot of these books of the Bible / the Torah, no one knows who really authored them. And allegedly, Manny himself wrote the Book of Giants, which is wild. The Book of Giants is an ancient apocryphal text, and it's traditionally associated with Manichaeism and earlier Jewish traditions, such as those found in the Book of Enoch. The Book of Giants explores the story of the Nephilim. The Nephilim were offspring of a giant race. They were known to be fallen angels, and they were said to have sex with human women. And so their offspring were known as the Nephilim. The Book of Giants expanded on themes of their sin, their punishment, and their eventual destruction. What? So, just to be clear, even though... Wait. I'm wrong. Manny did not write the Book of Giants. Manny wrote about... Okay, this makes so much more sense. No wonder. The Book of Giants is likely to have originated in the Second Temple of Judaism around the 3rd to the 1st century BCE. Okay, so this is like a good few hundred years, before Manny. That makes so much more sense. But Manny really was like writing a lot of scriptures about this and talking about the Book of Giants. Okay, we're caught up to speed. Whoa. So, Manny wrote elaborations of the events described in the Book of Giants and the Book of Genesis and the Book of Enoch. The Book of Giants describes the actions of the quote-unquote watchers who were fallen angels who descended to earth. They were known to have corrupted humanity and, of course, eventually fathered the Nephilim. According to Manny, the text... he modified and changed the text to fit his dualistic worldview. According to Manny, the giants are a symbol of the conflict between the forces of light and darkness. Like, what? Like, I'm just so sad that so many of these books haven't been, like, they feel like they've been seemingly erased. I just feel like it's so frustrating. Okay, so a plot summary of the Book of Giants is that the Book of Giants recounts the story of the Nephilim, who are the offspring of these fallen angels and human women, and it talks about their violent reign on planet Earth and their ultimate destruction of the Earth. Allegedly, not all of these texts have survived. And I say allegedly because sometimes I don't believe that. I feel like the Vatican has copies of this and they don't share. I would put money on it. Come for me. But these are the themes that are known to be mentioned within the Book of Giants. So one is the corruption of earth. The Watchers, who are like the rebellious angels, descended to earth and they took human wives, producing monstrous offsprings known as giants. This is known to have been the corruption of earth naturally. These giants were known to wreak havoc. They consumed human and animal life, and they spread sin and corruption. Okay, pause. I'm just going to put this through like an Anunnaki lens because, of course, the ancient Mesopotamian history, not religion, because allegedly ancient Mesopotamia didn't have a word for religion and they considered their writings to be history. But according to the Mesopotamians, there were gods who came out of the sky who were giant, and some of them took human wives. And many of them fathered children who eventually became the kings and queen of earth. From their history, those were great kings and queens. However, allegedly, some of these rulers were, from the human peasant perspective, were considered to be brutal, cruel. And so perhaps, I'm just like playing the devil's advocate right now, but perhaps this story of the Book of Giants is actually about the Anunnaki and the children that they fathered with humans and how they were dicks. You know, I'm just throwing out a theory here. Okay, also mentioned in the Book of Giants are the dreams of the giants. According to the Book of Giants, these children of the fallen angels and humans began to have apocalyptic dreams foretelling their destruction as punishment to their actions. One giant known as Oya dreams of a divine flood that will annihilate them. Another, known as Mawe, dreams of a heavenly tablet describing their doom. Hi there. Did you know that humans are made mostly of water? Something like 80% or something? I don't remember the stats. But water's crucial, you guys. Water's crucial. Have you been drinking water today? I highly recommend. You can also add a little bit of like pink salt or Celtic salt or some nice like real salt to your water to help your electrolytes. You can do a cucumber infusion. You could add some mint in there, some chia seeds. Like I'm inviting you to be creative here, but I'm also here to remind you, drink your water, baby boy. Drink your water. Really helps with the function of the nervous system, the function of the bowels. We're talking optimal functioning here. Drink your water, baby. I do really wonder how much is in the Vatican, how much like in the Vatican library. I don't know if any of you have listened to my first episode, which is about labyrinths, but there's a portion of that episode where I talk about a priest who was employed by the Vatican who was hired to spend like 20 years of his life or something in northern India and Nepal and literally just kept extensive journals. And apparently this was like a common practice in the Vatican for hundreds and hundreds of years. They would send priests around the world to keep detailed journals of all kinds of things: history, local customs, religious beliefs, and specifically ancient history. And specifically in the labyrinth part, there was this priest who was spending time in Nepal at least 1,000 years ago. And he talks about a local legend where there was a castle in the area whose walls were surrounded by a labyrinth. And allegedly this was in Gorakhpur, which I've actually been to. So they say that like the palace had a city around it, and around it, a giant labyrinth. And according to the local legend, the word labyrinth was also interchangeable for the word castle. And eventually somebody jumped the walls, and over time, like the walls were disassembled, blah, 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 blah. But I just like what I would do to get my hands on these journals that this priest was writing and sending back to the Vatican of like 20 years of traveling through northern India and Nepal. Like what? And like think about all the other priests in other parts of the world and what they were writing down. Like truly wild. And I would, like I said, I would really bet money that the Vatican has the Book of Enoch, the Book of Giants. That would be so cool. If for any reason anyone listening is associated with the Vatican, I would love to interview someone from the Vatican. I mean, who knows though? They wouldn't probably be truthful with me. I'm skeptical. I feel like they would lie. And I'm sure like a lot of people don't know all the deeds, you know. But okay, one last tangent. If you haven't seen the 1999 film Stigmata, starring Patricia Arquette, I'm telling you, you are in for a sweet treat. Stigmata is an incredible film. It is so much fun. I love that film. And there is actually like some aspects of the film which is like based in reality, which was that when the Dead Sea Scrolls were found, there were gospels that were translated and not added to the Bible. Like, even though they are considered part of the OG Bible / OG Torah, the Vatican deemed them as heretical, which is crazy. How can you deem scriptures that are older than your own religion and deem them as heretical? Like, that's crazy. You know what I'm saying? This is the kind of stuff that keeps me up at night, you guys. Okay, back on track. So, according to the Book of Giants, there was an aspect mentioned that was really about the themes of seeking forgiveness. So, in the Book of Giants, there is a section where these giants who started becoming terrified of their dreams and visions of like the world ending, basically, they seek advice from Enoch, who is a righteous prophet and scribe. And if I'm not mistaken, I do believe that Enoch is a ancestor of Noah. According to Enoch, according to the texts, I should say, Enoch hand wrote letters to God on their behalf, but the giants' pleas for mercy were ultimately rejected. And interestingly, again, I want to mention that according to ancient texts, Enoch did have Anunnaki blood. So, like, let's say Enoch, if his name started with an En, he was probably the son of Enlil, right? I'm just like looking at this with an Anunnaki perspective. But like Enoch, I'm assuming was the son of Enlil based on his name. And these other giants who are quote unquote half-breeds could have just been bastard children of other Anunnaki and therefore didn't have claim to their thrones, but just had a bunch of power over human beings. So the fact that Enoch wrote a letter to God could have been Enoch writing a letter to his dad, asking basically for his cousins to have mercy, right? And his dad was like, no, your cousins are a liability, right? That's just like what I'm picking up on this. Maybe I'm nuts. Okay, another aspect of the Book of Giants was divine judgment. In the Book of Giants, God decrees that the giants' destruction, God decrees that the giants must endure destruction. And that's what sets off the catastrophic flood. And that actually is interesting because that is a change of narrative, right? Because the catastrophic flood in the Bible is said that God is basically tired of humans and how selfish they are. Whereas in this story, God is tired of the giants and how entitled they are. At this point, the parents of the giants, who are the fallen angels, were imprisoned by God, and the earth was cleansed of their offspring and their corruption. Dude, this is honestly sounding a lot. This is like sounding deeply Anunnaki encoded. If you don't really know exactly what I'm talking about, I highly recommend to check out Introduction to Aliens Part 1. I also feel like I should just do a full episode on the Anunnaki. Believe me, I've like started notes so many times and I've gotten overwhelmed because it's like, where do we even start? There's so much to cover. Like, do I talk about the whole pantheon? Do I like talk about the pantheon in relationship to all the religions in the world? I start getting stressed. My brain starts going everywhere. I'm really just trying my best here, you guys. I'm just one guy. So that I just gave you a brief summary of like what the Book of Giants says. But this was like Manny's take on it. So Manny made certain adaptations to the text of the Book of Giants. And he really kind of takes it more to a cosmic dimension. According to Manny, the giants symbolize the chaotic mixing of light and darkness in the material world. He believed that the destruction of the giants represents the ultimate triumph of light over the forces of darkness. Manny also uses the story to emphasize the moral and spiritual consequences of sin and corruption. Interesting. So yeah, it does seem like he's taking more of a Gnostic view, like he's trying to interpret these ideas as symbols, which, you know, makes sense to me. So, Okay, I'm so sorry. My notes are insane. I am insane. Okay, so the last thing I really wanted to touch on was other greater impacts that Manny had on the religious world. And I did talk on this earlier. I did speak on this earlier. Yes. But Manny really did make a huge impact on the modern world, even if we don't know his name or hear about his religion. And so a really big aspect of Manny's visionary prowess was the idea of creating a universal religion. Manny envisioned Manichaeism to reach all people of the world, regardless of their culture, ethnicity, previous religious background. And he wanted it to appeal to people anywhere. That is part of why he integrated elements of Zoroastrianism, Christianity, Buddhism, and Gnosticism. And Manny created a religion that was both accessible and adaptable. His teaching focused on the cosmic struggle between light and dark, and he often would try to simplify his teaching so that everyone could understand them. And of course, his missionary efforts were really kind of what makes him such a visionary, or like a colonizer, perhaps. But because he traveled so much and he traveled through the Silk Road and major trading routes, it really reached so many people. He also focused on translating his texts so that everybody could read his writings. And like I mentioned earlier, he was very dedicated on art. He believed that art could help translate theological ideas, but also art made by local artists would make certain visuals more digestible to a lot of people. This is really what helped him gain so many followers. And also, I think, why he received so much tension from other religions. I think a lot of other religions saw him as someone poaching their followers and like perhaps as like a schemer. But if his intentions were in fact kind, it is pretty sweet, you know, to be able to be translating your text into many languages, having local artists, like, right, pay your local artist. I'm down with that. I'm down with that. I just, it just makes me so sad I haven't learned about this. You know, it makes me sad that I have to like research this myself and that I didn't hear about this like in school or something. Interestingly, little fun fact, when Manichaeism when it grew to its biggest in practicing population, It was very popular specifically in China, specifically during the Tang Dynasty, mostly because it blended very well with the Buddhist and Taoist traditions. And it wasn't really received so well in the West. I think a big part because once the Roman culture made the head of Christianity the Pope, they pretty quickly shot Manichaeism down as heretical and against the church. And one of the biggest legacies Manichaeism left is on the practice of Gnosticism, the theological practice of interpreting text. And Manny is often regarded as one of the most prominent Gnostic teachers of antiquity. His dualistic cosmology, which divided the universe into realms of light and darkness, became the cornerstone of Gnostic thought. Manny's emphasis on esoteric knowledge as the key to salvation aligned with earlier Gnostic traditions, but he also systemized these ideas into a cohesive theological framework. And I do think that's like really important to think about because Gnosticism did really shape a lot of the minds of the early 19th century and the 18th century, actually. A lot of the men who started the United States of America, who again were like not necessarily good people, but I'm just saying a lot of those people were studying Gnosticism, and also a lot of the scientists of the age were studying alchemy, which does tie into this quite a bit. And I was mentioning also in my last episode about the French Revolution and people starting to question authority and interpret religious texts for themselves. And that's really kind of what Gnosticism is about. It's about asking questions and doing your own research to try to interpret these ancient texts, which is truly revolutionary. And if you haven't listened to the episode on Johnsonism, one could claim that the movement of trying to understand religious texts on your own, in big part, created the atmosphere which led to the French Revolution. And my knowledge about the what is it called when you study the planets? Astrology. My astrology knowledge isn't extensive, but what is it like? Neptune and Saturn are in the same placements they were during the French Revolution, right? Am I right? I think I'm right. I don't remember. Don't quote me on that. Don't quote me on that. Okay, so a lot of influences that Manny made on the Christian church. One of them I mentioned was just like the simple nuns habit that comes from Manichaean culture. But also through the lens of Christianity, Manny positioned himself as an apostle of light. And he claimed to be the final prophet in a lineage, right, that I mentioned, include Jesus, Zoroaster, and Buddha. And he reinterpreted Jesus solely as a spiritual figure. So Manny did not believe that Jesus actually incarnated into human form, that he was only a spirit. And of course, the Orthodox Christian beliefs were not having that, and that was another big reason why they couldn't stand him. But a lot of his written texts about dualism did actually affect Christianity quite a bit. And it did inspire writers like St. Augustine. And again, St. Augustine was a really big influence for the Jansenist movement. So this really is like all like a trickle-down theology, trickle-down economics, trickle-down theology. And of course, like I mentioned earlier, Manny adopted a lot of like basic ideals from Zoroaster, the idea of like light versus dark, which in Zoroastrianism, the light is referred to as Ahura Mazda and the dark as Angra Mainyu. And again, the Zoroastrians were not really having Manny. They did not like him, and they did not really see him as adding on to the religion. And so this, again, is really what created the the setting for him to be hated by a lot of people. And But again, what I do find really interesting is that I think part of why he caught on so much in China is because their primary religion at the time was Buddhism, and they were very interested in Taoism, which in many ways are less about being religions and more about being spiritualities or even philosophies. And so I think they appreciated Manny as a thinker and someone who really focused on the simplicity of dualism and, of course, asceticism and like living as a monk. I just find that so interesting. So, I feel like I can go on forever. Okay, I have more in my notes, but I feel like I'm like beating a dead horse here. I feel like I'm like almost like repeating certain things, but I'll just do a couple honorable mentions. So one of them is that Manny was remembered as a prophet, and his teachings were sometimes conflated and related to the teachings of the Sabians, who were a group that were actually mentioned in the Quran. Also, the Sabians are known to be the original inhabitants of the city of Rome before Rome kind of became the ancient Australia. I should do an episode on that. So basically, what I'm saying is, according to some people, it is believed that Manny was actually pulling from even more ancient religions, specifically of the native group known as the Sabians, who inhabited parts of ancient Rome and as well as parts of the ancient Mediterranean peninsula. Also, Manny and his illustrated text inspired very many later religions and art traditions, particularly in Central Asia and China. And I also think it's really important to think about his legacy on art. Like, I think Manny inspired more local people to do their interpretations of different prophets or what have you throughout history. And more than anything, I think Manny's biggest legacy was that he left an academic and theological legacy. People were inspired that he was writing about his interpretation of texts, and it left a legacy going on in many religions, regardless if they believed him or not, of this theme of having your own ideas about a religious text and writing about it. And of course, perhaps his biggest legacy is the idea of universalism. He really did try to create a universal religion, and this, you could claim, it was replicated by the Christian church to try to make the religion appeal to everyone, and I guess from the Roman Catholic perspective, to enforce the religion on everyone. But he had some really interesting PR techniques that were very, very effective. And that, my dear friends, is Manichaeism. If I was to see a Hollywood movie, I would love to see a Hollywood movie about this guy. This seems so much more controversial to me, and so much more interesting than like these stories that we keep hearing. Like, they keep trying to make movies about Jesus or whatever. Like, I would love to hear the story about Manny told dramatically, soap opera fashion, in an ancient setting. Make that. Hire me. I'll write the movie, damn it. Thank you so much. You're the best. Have a beautiful evening.